back. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. As is normal and is customary with most organizations, there's a quarterly review of the economy, and one of such reports that we're looking at today was done by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. They recently reviewed the first quarter, how the economy performed in the first quarter of the year, and so today on the program, that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be reviewing the report, the first quarter report from the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I'm being joined on the program by the Director General of the LCCI, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf, for coming.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Well, let's talk about that report. Let's just look at it holistically before we begin to piece it down. Look at it piece by piece. What was organized private sector's impression of how the economy fared in the first quarter of the year?
Well, we look at the economy from a number of perspectives. We have the key economic indicators, what we call the macroeconomic indicators, where we look at the GDP. Of course, we had the GDP rebasing, the GDP growth outlook. We look at indicators such as the exchange rate and the way it has, moved during the quarter, issues of inflation, the pressure on foreign reserves. All these have one form of implication or impact or the other on the economy.
Okay, so now...
Then, of course, we have investment climate issues. We had policy issues, consistency of policy reversals, security issues. So all these variables affect the economy and businesses in one form or the other.
Now let's break it down.
Yeah.
Let's start with the rebasing.
Yeah.
Everybody was particularly excited about it.
Yeah.
Organized private sector as well as the average Nigerian, although not every average Nigerian was excited about that. Yeah. Now, in spite of the fact that LCCI actually supported the rebasing, there were still some criticisms.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think it depends on the mindset or the perspective of analysis. From a strictly economic point of view, the whole idea of rebasing is just putting forward a new set of data that could guide economic analysis and that could also guide the engagement of those in government. Because you need data for planning, whether at the public sector end or at the private sector end. And the new data that has been thrown up by the GDP rebasing is a very valuable data for that purpose. It is also valuable because it helps to also locate some of the gaps in the governance process. Because when you now have a GDP that is now said to be the biggest, the largest on the African continent, we are talking of $500 billion US. The question it throws up is how equitable, what is the impact? And that is what has made the whole GDP rebasing outcome very controversial. Because people are saying, okay, you have this much of GDP, there's nothing to celebrate. Look at the welfare of the people. Look at infrastructure. Look at security. No, these are issues. So these are some of the benefits of it. You have a large size, because if you look at the economies worldwide, the most developed economies also have high GDP. So in a sense, there is a correlation between the size of your GDP and the development that you have. If there is a disconnect, then there is an issue with governance. The US economy is the largest economy globally, an economy of about $16 trillion US. The US is a developed economy. China is the second largest economy of about $8 trillion US. China has issues with poverty because of its population. Then you have Germany, you have France, you have Australia. These are countries in the league of what you can call the top 10. If you look at their development parameters, they are sound. If you look at their GDP, they are also big. So in a sense, there is a correlation between GDP and development. Because the GDP is a necessary condition for development.
Now, Mr. Yusuf,
but it is not a sufficient condition.
Mr. Yusuf, can I quickly ask this question?
Yes.
With the rebasing of the GDP, as you said, it put things in a clearer perspective for us.
Yeah.
So that investors begin to understand that this is the data they should be working with.
Yeah.
And if, for instance, they want to invest, this is what they have on ground.
Yeah.
Now, if this thing if the rebasing put things in perspective, why is it that organized private sector is not looking at the bigger picture, as in now that we have these numbers. For instance, in the short to medium, not too long, we might begin to see things turn around. But instead of looking at the bigger picture, it seems that they're critical of the here and now.
You see, in order to even achieve what you can call the vision or the bigger picture, you need to get it right now. You cannot be doing the same thing and expect a different result.
Which is the reason why, with the rebasing, it seems like that, yes, they have decided that we are going to make sure that we're doing things right. Even if it seems as if it's coming a little later than it should have come, but we're starting it. And so if that is the case, shouldn't the government be given the chance to show that they are on that path to ensure that organized private sector and indeed the whole economy benefits from this rebasing?
You see, the thing is that the rebasing is one thing. Getting things done properly to impact on business and to impact on the welfare of the people is a completely different thing. Now, the other leg of it, which is a developmental issue, there is nothing on the table yet for us to feel comfortable that something is either happening or is about to happen. For instance, we have a big economy. There is no doubt about that. We have the largest economy on this continent. There is no doubt about that. We have the largest population on this continent. Nobody is disputing that. All these things is supposed to impact more on the population than what is happening. But look at the resources that we have. That is where you should begin from. How are we allocating those resources to meet the objectives of development? Because the key issue now is about development. It's about productivity. Now, you have a budget before us, which is 74% recurrent. To what extent will that deliver development? That is an issue. You have a spending pattern where you are spending, in the budget, you are spending 712 billion naira on debt service, on interest payments. And the bulk of these debts were not incurred to develop infrastructure. They were incurred to run the business of government. That cannot deliver development. If you have a situation where the richest people in the economy, who are the major beneficiaries of this growth we are talking about, how much tax are they paying? Because the whole essence of governance is to make sure that you get as much from the rich to support the poor. But what we have seen is that the people that pay tax in this economy are basically salary earners. Those who really make the real money, they are not paying tax. So that again cannot deliver. These are some of the gaps that are leading to the disconnect between the growth and development. Unless we're able to harness all these benefits and channel it to, say, education, you channel it to health, you channel it to roads, to railways, we cannot feel the impact.
Mr. Yusuf, comment on this as well. It's also part of the report that that LCCI released, that even though we're the 26th largest economy in the world, we're still ranked 147 in the latest Ease of Doing Business report by the World Bank out of 189 countries profiled. This actually shows a disconnect between growth and development.
It shows. And the importance of that is the investment climate dimension. Because when you say that the economy is not inclusive, it's not inclusive because the players in the economy, particularly the indigenous players, have no place in the mainstream of the economy. They have no place not because they don't have the enterprising competencies or the entrepreneurial competencies, but they are constrained by the investment climate issues. Competitiveness is about the investment climate. You see what you have been going through with the power situation. Unless you are a big company that can afford to invest properly in power and you have large scale of production, it is difficult for you to be competitive under the current policy regime. We see what is happening with even logistics. You see what is happening to credit. You see what is happening to the influx of goods from other countries, particularly Asia. There is no way you can produce locally and be able to compete. And these are things that can deliver jobs to Nigerians. So to the extent that these pockets of businesses have competitiveness or productivity issues, to that extent, they will not be able to deliver the kind of value we expect from them to support the economy, to support welfare, to create jobs. So competitiveness issues, investment climate issues are very critical. Again, all this also flows from governance. Unless you structure government spending, and when I say government spending, I'm referring to government at federal, state, and local government. I'm not just referring to the federal. So the totality of our governments needs to focus their spending more in the areas that can bring about the kind of productivity of enterprises. Unless we do that, all we'll be seeing are just the numbers. You'll be seeing figures, big figures in the budget, big figures in the GDP, but we will not see the benefit. So these are the gaps that we need to address. And to address that, you need good understanding of those in governance to be able to structure resources of government. Look at how much we are spending, for instance, to be importing fuel. It's billions of dollars. It is a minus. If you look at what you call the national income model, whatever you spend on imports is a negative factor in national income. So if you are spending so much for an oil-producing country, to be spending so much, to be spending billions of dollars to import fuel, that itself is scandalous. So these are some of the weaknesses that we need to address. And these are the sources of the disconnect between the wealth of nation, the wealth of the country, and the welfare of the people.
Now,
these are the sources.
As much as possible, the federal government has been trying to create jobs and try to forge inclusive growth, which we know that's a theme for the World Economic Forum Africa. Now, you've highlighted some of these challenges, and we're still going to go back to some of those other macroeconomic variables that you mentioned and some of the also investment variables that you mentioned as you started a conversation. But now, in terms of what you've highlighted now, how and who should begin to push the process to ensure that all these anomalies that you've highlighted are addressed?
Well, all of us have a role to play.
Yes, because it seems as if everybody always says it's the government and they're always pointing at the government.
No, you see, the leadership is very critical to the process. Because if you want to drive change in any process, it has to start from the top. It's easier to effect a change from the top than to effect a change from the bottom. So if we get the leadership that also understands what the priorities of the country should be in terms of making sure that the resources are equitably expended or distributed, that is a starting point. Another point is the issue of engagement of those of us that are stakeholders in this economy. Because there are some of these issues in which even those in government have very limited understanding. Sometimes they have even limited understanding of the linkages between some of these variables. So that when we talk about corruption being a big problem, for instance, some of them are not able to connect how corruption can be a problem to a business enterprise, for instance. Whereas it can be a big issue because of corruption you are not able to deliver infrastructure, it creates problem of productivity and competitiveness for business. These things are interlinked. They are linked one way or the other. But back to the point of the involvement of the stakeholders. Those of us in the private sector have a role to play in advocacy, which is what we do basically at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and even among other business associations. The civil society organizations have a role to play. The National Assembly also have a role to play. So all of us, unless we have a common vision and we have a buy-in, we will continue to have this kind of problem. Because the biggest problem we have is about proper allocation of resources. That is the bottom line. And that is why the whole system seems to be stagnated.
Okay.
Now, we are going now close to the election period. You can see from all the things that are happening, that between now and 2015, the political space is going to be progressively enlarged. The economic space is likely to continue to shrink. Because a lot of resources, a lot of even energies of government will be focused now on the election. The guy said the campaign has not started. But you can see what is happening in all the parties. You can see what is happening even with the current restructuring of the federal cabinet. We are now having more politicians in cabinet than technocrats. All these are indicative of the kind of priorities that we are likely to see between now and next year, which is not very good for the economy.
Well, Mr. Yusuf,
these are issues.
Let's quickly take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue this conversation. When we come back, we'll focus on the other aspects of the macroeconomic dimensions that was actually mentioned in that report. We'll take our conversation from there. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. Today on the program, we're actually reviewing a report put out by the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry for the first quarter of the year. It was basically on the economy, that is Nigerian economy, and it focused on macroeconomic dimensions and investment dimensions. And so we'll come back, we'll actually continue our conversation from there. They have the Director General of the LCCI here with me in the studio, Mr. Muda Yusuf. He's going to be here when we return in just a moment. Please join us again.